All right. Hi, guys. It's a big class here today. I think 8 or 9 on Zoom, which is awesome. Yeah, we got way more than 8 or 9. Awesome. That's great. Okay. So people on Zoom, for our discussion section today, you guys will use the chat function. Yes? Okay, anyway, we'll get there. And if you have questions, I don't check the chat very often, so please just try to gently push yourself into the conversation if you have questions as we go. Other than that, we're going to get started. Zoom, please make sure to mute yourself so we don't get background noise. This is my older laptop, so it's running slow. Okay, welcome. Today we're going to talk a little bit about universal design for learning. Who is familiar with UDL? In the classroom, raise your hand. Yes, no, maybe, some. Okay, how many of you guys took the online tutor orientation or attended live tutor orientation with me? We talked a little bit about UDL, but we didn't really expand. UDL is one of the big things that we use in our program when we're working with our students. So it would make sense to incorporate that as a CRLA training, right? We want to talk about UDL, and then we're going to talk about its principles, and then we'll finish with kind of going to the CAS website and looking at how we use those UDL principles to work with our students and how you can use the resources on the CAS website for UDL to help you when you have questions about working with students. So this is kind of a intro to what we're going to be doing in a few weeks with Christina, where she's talking about executive functioning and kind of getting even more in depth about how to work with students' brains and neuroscience and how we can adapt to a student's neurodiversity. UDL is going to be a big component of that. So I backed those two up. So what is Universal Design for Learning? UDL is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how students are humans, learn. And that's from the CAS website. CAS stands for the Center for Applied Special Technologies. So they are very big into making technology accessible. They're very big into making sure that teaching practices are making things equitable and accessible for students of all ages and all levels. So UDL kind of comes out of, it's their brainchild in a lot of ways. UDL consists of 3 main guidelines. The first is engagement, which is the why of learning. And this is for purposeful, motivated learners. You want to stimulate interest and motivation for learning. The second one is representation, or the what. What am I learning? This is for resourceful, knowledgeable learners. You want to present information and content in different ways. And then action and expression, which is the how of learning. For strategic, goal-oriented learners, you want to differentiate the ways that students can express what they know. So those are the 3 principles of universal design for learning. And they don't just exist in 1, 2, 3. I have to pick one for a student, right? Students are very complex. People are very complex. And so you may combine these when you're working with students. So we're going to talk first about engagement, which is, again, for purposeful, motivated learners who want to stimulate interest and motivation for learning. So these are students who might come in and they don't jive with the material, right? I really hate math. I really hate English. How do I get you engaged with this subject so that you want to learn this information? The first thing is to recruit interest. So when I was a writing tutor, one of the big things I would get is, in particular, a 19 to 21-year-old young man who was very interested in video games. This was a very consistent thing when I was tutoring, is I had these young men who loved video games, hated writing. And I think I had maybe 3 or 4 students that I worked with who this was the case. And so what I would say is, okay, well, you don't like writing, you love video games. So let's figure out how to work video games into your writing so that you at least have some interest in what you're talking about. So optimize individual choice and autonomy. So I said, let's find something you're interested in and go from there. Optimize relevance, value, and authenticity. Video games were their life. Like 2 of them were on an esports team. And I'm not kidding, they were making a lot of money doing esports. That was going to be their thing. And I haven't followed up with them on that, but I assume that they've carried forward with some of that. So, you know, the value and authenticity really mattered to them. And then minimize threats and distractions. When you're taking an English course and they want you to talk about a subject that's very, very emotionally intense or can trigger something, you want to minimize that triggering and you want to minimize that intensity for the student when you're working with them on that subject. Sustain effort and persistence. Heightened salience of goals and objectives. So you want to make sure that you're goal oriented with this, is that once we finish with your thesis, we can then move on to organization so you can actually start putting your thoughts in order. Foster collaboration and community. So this is a good opportunity to get them kind of involved. I had a student last quarter who was doing a Dungeons and Dragons paper and actually joined a Dungeons and Dragons team to be able to be more informed about writing the paper. So that was cool, collaboration and community. Increase mastery-oriented feedback. And then self-regulation, promote expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. So get the student to kind of internalize this and make it relevant to them, make them care. Facilitate personal coping skills and strategies and develop self-assessment and reflection. That's a big one when you're working with students on their material, right? When they come in with a test and they haven't done well on the test and they're really frustrated and it's a subject that they don't like, that can feel like failure. And so you want to develop, how do we assess where you went wrong in the test and what we can do moving forward so that you don't make those same mistakes. So those are the elements of engagement. We're going to play with these a lot more as we go. Real quick, Zoomies, could you guys mute your mic? I'm getting a lot of strange feedback sounds. Like that one. No. Give me a second. Okay, we're just gonna push ahead and try to ignore whatever that is, because whoever it is either can't hear me or whatever. Anyway, representation. We're recording this, by the way. We're resourceful, knowledgeable learners. We want to present information and content in different ways. So representation is, oh, it's so hard to
Nancy, it's your mic.
Whee! I fell asleep, I don't know.
Now that we're unmuted, Kim, I'm sorry. Zoom was trying to be smart about what meeting I was in.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna force mute people here. All right, now everybody's muted. Woohoo! Ooh, that threw me off. Okay. Nothing ever goes right.
There's actually a really fun Twitter out there recently. You guys see it? It's a town hall meeting, and the mayor of a small town goes to the restroom and stays mic'd up.
Oh.
And the woman keeps speaking during it, and in the background goes these things. No. Laughing. And it's just hilarious. It's all that is. Sorry. It could be worse.
It could be worse. Yes, no, somebody's snoring into my mic. Anyway, never had that happen before. I can't say that was. Anyway, Monday. It's not Monday, but it feels like a Monday when I do these. I come in and the technology doesn't work, and today we're going pretty smoothly except for that. So something was bound to go wrong, and there we are. All right, representation. This is for resourceful, knowledgeable learners. These are for people who seek out learning. Right? They want to seek out learning, but may not have the best methods of integrating that information. Perception, offer ways to customize the display of information, offer alternatives for auditory information, and offer alternatives for visual information. Remember, not everybody receives and sends information the same way. Okay? So what we want to do as tutors is make sure that our students, if they have vision as an issue, we want to make sure that we're dimming the lights, or that we are working with whatever technology that they have. If they have Kurzweil, right, we can blow up the font really big. I know we have some students who use Kurzweil to have things read back to them, so they're both hearing and reading and working with whatever it is that they're working on. So with perception, we want to think about, just because I see something one way, or I hear something one way, or I experience something one way. My student may not. A good example is I was sent a poster to review this week, and I was looking at the font going, I don't know. And it turns out that the person doing this is a graffiti artist, right? And that's great, except that they are doing this for autism awareness. And when you have font that's very difficult to read, even though it looks great in graffiti, for students with autism, that's unreadable. I can't read that. It looks like a Halloween photo. Okay, so my comments back were, let's make this more UDL. You want to use Calibri, you want to use Times New Roman, you want to use a font that's not too flowery, that literally makes the letters very clear so that it's easy to read, because again, some of our students have vision issues. And some of our students have dyslexia or dyscalculia, and so looking at that font is going to be very hard for them. So those are things when we're thinking about perception, you want to think outside of your experience. And, you know, the person making this is an artist, right? So artists make everything from my experience, and the world has to kind of conform to my experience. And that doesn't work when we're trying to get people to learn information and help them learn information. So we want to make it relevant to them and not to our experience. Language and symbols. Clarify vocabulary and symbols, clarify syntax and structure, support decoding of text, mathematical notation and symbols, and illustrate through multiple media. Language and symbols. How many of you guys use Khan Academy? Any math tutors in here, science tutors in here use Khan Academy? If you're not using Khan Academy, use Khan Academy. It's a great resource. Okay, they have a lot of good basic intro to science, to math, to writing. They have a lot of neat things. But that can help with multiple media, right? You're taking a student to a web page and showing them equations, you're showing them writing examples, you're showing them things that you haven't done yourself. Can you use YouTube to show examples or talk about concepts? Yeah, in fact, I find some people on YouTube do things much better than I do when I'm trying to explain concepts. What about photos, picture illustrations? You guys ever draw on the whiteboards and make image illustrations? I know as a writing tutor, I did a lot of kind of image illustration when it came to commas in particular. When I'm trying to teach commas, I have to use photos a lot because for some reason pictures and commas make more sense than words and commas. And then comprehension. Activate or supply background knowledge, highlight patterns, critical features, big ideas and relationships, guide information processing and visualization. So this is that whole check for comprehension. And if the students just go, just shaking their head, nodding, yeah, no, I get it. Do they really? My experience is 9 times out of 10 when you're getting the vacant stare and the kind of complacent nodding, they're not really taking in what you've just discussed. So what's a way that we could kind of ask about comprehension? One way is we say, you explain it back to me. What did I just say? I do this a lot at home. What did I just say? Okay. Guide information processing, comprehension. What's another way to check for comprehension? Have them teach it back to you, right? Okay, we just walked through this problem. Now you do this problem and you teach it to me. What else? Activate background or supply background knowledge. I was working with one of my students on his Greek history class last quarter, which was a really cool class. I happen to know a lot about Greek history. Being an English major gives you a lot of perspective and a lot of different kind of European and American historical backgrounds. So Greek history was one of the things that I really focused on. So I got super excited. I started giving him all this background information about, he had to write a paper on Hades. And I just kind of went off on these tangents for about 30 minutes. He let me, which was very nice of him. But in the discussion, right, because you just gave me a whole lot of information from my paper. That's great because I made some connections there that I hadn't thought about before. So supplying that background knowledge to kind of make the information a little bit more easy to understand. And then action and expression. This is for strategic, goal-directed learners. Differentiate the ways that students can express what they know. So this is where we really kind of get into learning styles, right? Do you express visually? Do you express auditorily? Do you express using kinesthetic means? Physical action. Vary the methods for response and navigation. Optimize access to tools and assistive technologies. You guys have all noticed the universal design for learning boxes in the tutoring rooms? Yeah? That's for the physical action part of this. We have fidgets in there, we have highlighters, we have all kinds of things that students can touch, pipe cleaners, wiki sticks, all kinds of things for students and tutors to use together to kind of help with that physical expression of information. Vary the methods for response and navigation. If a student needs to get up and move around during a tutoring session, let them. Sometimes they have to move around. Sometimes they have to walk down the hallway and come back because the information, if they have math anxiety in particular, let them go down the hall and come back in 5 minutes because it's not a personal thing. They just need to work off the anxiety and come back to it. So we want to make sure we're allowing students to express themselves in physical ways. Expression and communication. Use multiple media for communication. Use multiple tools for construction and composition. And build fluencies with graduated levels of support for practice and performance. Expression and communication. How many of you guys only talk with your students via text? Email? Face-to-face? Yeah. So when we're speaking with students, do you guys ever give them information in an email and then reiterate it face-to-face and then make them repeat it back to you? I mean, that's a 3-step process, right? But that's kind of that expression and communication is, I'm going to use multiple means. It's in written form, it's in verbal form, and then you've reinforced it by telling it back to me. Multiple tools for construction and composition. In any writing tutors in here work with Kurzweil? Ever worked with students who have Kurzweil? Okay, yeah. Kurzweil is a free technology for students here at DU where it will essentially, they can dictate their papers. So if their typing skills aren't great, they can verbalize their papers, go back and edit their papers. They can take verbal notes on information. Kurzweil also does this awesome thing where you can upload an image PDF and it will convert it to OCR, which means that it can be read by a voice reader software, which is pretty awesome. So if you're not making use of those tools, you should be making use of those tools. It allows highlighting, it allows blowing things up. You can pull pieces from the text, make notes on it. It's a really neat piece of software. But if we're not using multiple tools, if we're just using pen and paper or pencil and paper or just a laptop or whatever, we're not really utilizing the really large amount of technology that's out there to be working with students. Okay. And then executive functions, which we're going to expand on next week. So I'm not really going to focus on this one too heavily today, or not next week, a few weeks from now when Christina does her presentation. Guide appropriate goal setting, support planning and strategy development, facilitate managing information and resources, and enhance capacity for monitoring progress. Christina's going to get into this much more in depth and really talk about neuroscience and neurodiversity and how that kind of helps a student. We can help students work on their executive functioning skills. Goal setting, appropriate goal setting. How many of you guys get students who come in, and I know we've talked about this before, but they come in and they go, I'm going to work on these 5 things in our 1-hour tutoring session. And you're going, well, we might get 1 or 2 done. Working on them with appropriate goal setting and saying, okay, here's what setting a goal for within a timeline looks like. Now, these other things, we can set goals later down the line, and then you see what a timeline plan looks like. So we can expand there. Facilitate managing information and resources, right? How many of your students come in and go, I just don't know where to go for anything, right? There are other resources available. If you're doing language tutoring, but you're not available at a time when a student needs you, can you refer them to the World Language Center? Yeah, of course, teach them how to use that resource. They have Spanish tutors over there. They have Japanese tutors over there. I know that because I hired the same Japanese tutor. So, so there's a lot of fun resources for students to use. Same with mental health issues, right? Do you know where CRC is? Do you know, not CRC, HCC is? And do you know how to refer students over to HCC? If not, you might want to review the mental health first aid training in the resource page to kind of walk you through that. And then, what's our time? We got time for this. We're going to do the CAST at a glance, just to kind of introduce you to CAST and who they are. This is a little brief presentation about Universal Design for Learning that they put together.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet the diversity. Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. The captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied support. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and support for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interest in autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways. Allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways. And offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
All right. No, we don't want to watch it again. What the heck? I mean, repetition. It is UDL, technically. And interestingly enough, so this video was produced by Cast. If you go into the transcript, okay, so YouTube will either auto-transcribe captions, or you can write up the entire transcript and upload it with part of that video, and you have to work on the timing of when everything is going to be presented. Cast has done the latter. So when they put videos together, they go through and they physically transcribe the entire video to make sure that the captions are accurate, they're timed accurately, and that they are in a font and speed that presents to people in a way that they can follow easily. Which is why if you ever do a CAST webinar, they won't send you the video for about a week because it takes them about a week to do all that. So they're very meticulous to make sure that they are making their materials accessible and available in a way that doesn't detract from that accessibility. They're a really neat organization. So we're going to talk about the guidelines. We're going to go to the CAST website for this. And I want you guys to all, this will be up on the Canvas resource page. You all will have access to this. But I want you all to kind of use this every once in a while when you have a student where you're like, I'm not sure what to do in this situation. Because that's the whole point of this. Well, maybe not. Maybe we'll just look it up. Zoomies, can you guys see my screen changing? I didn't mute you guys that hard. Can you see my screen changing?
Yes.
Okay. So CAST has done this really awesome thing where, again, in line with the principles of UDL, they have made their guidelines interactive online. So if we go to the website and we go to their guidelines here, as you can see, they have given you the 3 guidelines: engagement, representation, action, and expression, and they've color-coded them, which is awesome. Again, UDL. And they've made it so that you can interact with them. So if I click on engagement, it's going to take me to a section about engagement, right? But this is just the top layer. There are layers built into this thing. Affect represents a crucial element in learning, and learners differ markedly in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to learn. So it gives you a little bit of background information on engagement itself. But then you come down here, and it has a whole lot of fun things that you can play with. These are the guidelines and checkpoints, right? So if you have a student who you don't know how to get interested in a subject, you can come down here to recruiting interest, and you can say, okay, do I need to optimize individual choice and autonomy? Do I need to make this information relevant, or do I need to minimize threats and distractions? Depending on what the student needs, you can go to one of these, and it will give you information on things you can try with that student that will help do that. So for instance, if you have a student who doesn't understand why I'm in an English class, I don't know why I need to do this, I'm never going to write, you know, it's not like they email people on a daily basis. I had someone email me about a tutoring job the other day that said, hey, I heard you're hiring for tutors, what's the info on that? And I kind of went, you know, I have to think carefully about how to respond to this. Because when I'm giving information back to somebody, right, they haven't learned the relevance of good writing principles. Good writing principles when you're writing an email is you introduce yourself, you talk a little bit about your interests, right? You politely ask for more information, and then you say thank you for your time, and then you sign off. That's kind of the typical email structure. But because this person obviously didn't really think about the relevance of learning good writing etiquette, I had to sit there as the tutor coordinator and go, how do I respond? Okay. So if you have a student who can't really understand the relevance of the material, you can vary your activities and sources of information so that they can be personalized and contextualized to the learner's lives, culturally relevant and responsive, socially relevant, age and ability appropriate for different racial, cultural, ethnic, and gender groups. Design activities so that learning outcomes are authentic, communicate to real audiences, and reflect a purpose that is clear to the participants. Provide tasks that allow for active participation, exploration, and experimentation. Invite personal response, evaluation, and self-reflection to content and activities. Include activities that foster the use of imagination to solve novel and relevant problems or make sense of complex ideas in creative ways. So not only are you giving the students creative ways to determine relevance of information, this is giving you, the tutor, creative ways to determine how to make that information relevant to your students. Does that make sense? So what I want to do for the rest of our time together is have you guys kind of throw out things, and we will go through and we'll play with the map on here. So we'll go back to our map. And Jimmy, please feel free to participate here. You can also chat amongst yourselves in the chat function if you want to do that as well. So let's somebody throw out a student and an issue that they might be having, and we'll determine where it sits on this list. Sarah? Geography?
Yes.
Okay.
And she's had 2 tests, and she flunked both of them.
Okay.
The first one was maybe a 40-something, and then she started working with me. And I referred her to a tutor that has more geography experience, but she wants to stay to practice trying to learn it. So, okay.
So you're working more on study skills.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I emailed her to see how the test was, and she said it went really poorly again, that hopefully it'll get better next time. So and she's not passionate about it, she's trying, but she's a senior,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like she doesn't have a lot of study skills built in, and she's kind of floated through, and now into one class where she's not passionate about it, she doesn't know how to make these random information that's never going to be applicable to her career is thick enough to pass the test.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So under which of these, engagement, representation, and action expression, do we think we could find some assistance to work with this student? Engagement, okay, which one? Recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, self-regulation, or we can pick multiple. The first two? Okay, so which one should we click on? Where do we feel like we have the largest amount of information we're seeking for the student? Relevance, value, and authenticity, okay, which we were just at, interestingly enough. That seems to be a big one with students. So using these, what are some things you could try, Sarah, with the students?
That's where I'm stuck. So we practiced her reading things back out loud. We practiced Googling answers. We practiced her writing out things.
Hey, Kim, can you repeat the scenario? I could not hear it.
We have a student who is taking a geography class as a senior and has kind of gotten by with all the other classes until this class where all of a sudden it's supposed to be an easy class and it's not, and they're having a hard time staying motivated because they aren't doing well on tests.
Okay, thanks.
And she's not sure how she learns information.
She's not sure how she learns.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it seems to be some foundational.
So we're kind of in a interesting spot with this student, right? Where engagement is definitely a problem, but is the engagement poor because they're doing poorly on the test, or is the engagement poor because they really don't like the information? So part of this is going back to the skills that we've done in the past, working on those 4 cornerstones with the student, and getting them to advocate for what they need, right? You have to communicate to me what you need. Part of that is probably going to fall here under executive functioning, right? Which the student may or may not know what assistance they need. So under executive functions, support planning and strategy development, I would say. Because it sounds like the student just doesn't know how to go about learning. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. So let's check under that one and see if there's any good information. And again, when Christina comes and does her presentation in a couple weeks, a lot of this, we're going to take the learning component and put it together with the brain function component, and a lot of this is going to make a much more rounded picture. So support planning and strategy development. Once a goal is set, and our goal is to pass the class, right? Effective learners and problem solvers plan a strategy, including the tools they will use for reaching that goal. We're not really focusing on children here. So for older learners in a new domain or any learner with one of the disabilities that compromise executive functions, for example, intellectual disabilities, the strategy planning step is often omitted and trial and error attempts take its place. Does that sound about right? Like we're just picking and choosing things without really having a strategy for how you learn. To help learners become more planful and strategic, a variety of options are needed, such as cognitive speed bumps, that prompt them to stop and think, graduated scaffolds that help them actually implement strategies, or engagement in decision-making with competent mentors. This student sounds like they also probably ought to have a conversation with their counselor if they haven't been having conversations with their counselors, because that's the competent mentor function up here in the LEP, right? That's the person the student has assigned to them to help them get through these cognitive speed bumps. So things we can do as tutors: embed prompts to stop and think before acting, as well as adequate space. Embed prompts to show and explain your work, so portfolio review, art critiques. Provide checklists and project planning templates for understanding the problem, setting up prioritization, sequences, and schedules of steps. Embed coaches or mentors that model think aloud to the process. Provide guides for breaking long-term goals into reachable short-term objectives. At this point, if the student's not doing well in that class, there's a lot of planning that needs to happen, but I think you're going to have to get together with that student's counselor first and foremost and have those discussions. But as a tutor, some things that kind of stick out to me here are provide checklists and project planning templates for understanding the problem, setting up prioritization, sequences, and schedule of steps. At the beginning of the quarter, this is when this should take place, right? Like, what is our goal? We need to, it's SMART goals, right? My goal is to pass the class. Passing grade is a C, C minus. That's what we're aiming for. If you do better, great. Okay? That's the goal. That's where we're aiming for. That's our end. But we have to build the plan in between. So provide checklists and project planning. Checklists would be like that student's 10-week calendar. If they haven't shown you their 10-week calendar, that's helpful for tutors to see. By the way, every student does a 10-week calendar with their LEP counselor that breaks down the things that they need to do over the course of the quarter, when their tests are going to happen, when their assignments are due, when they have meetings that they have to attend. That 10-week calendar can be a good tool for you if the student's willing to share it. So then you make those little road marks, right? Here's test 1, here's test 2, here's test 3, here's the assignments in between. Here's what our workflow for the quarter is going to look like for this class. And sitting down and saying, here's when you should be studying because you have a test on this day. Here's when you should be studying because you have a test on this day. Here's when you should be attending tutoring, the complement study days, and the test days. Do you think that would have been beneficial to the student? Yeah. And you keep in mind, it's a difficult situation because our students can choose whether or not they do recurring sessions. This would be ideal for recurring sessions. Okay? If a student's just doing one-off, it might be you have to just create a strategy for that particular session. Okay? Does that kind of give you some idea of how you can use this to maybe assist that student in the future? Okay.
She just emailed me back yesterday, so I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
So I was going to contact the counselor.
Good. All right. Let's do another one. Anybody else got students that they want to use this for? Give some ideas? Yeah.
I have a student who I tutored writing, and she constantly is saying, I can't do this. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
Like, there's really, like, kind of combative when I try to get her to, like, really put in some words.
Yeah. So let me just reiterate for the Zoomies. We have a student taking writing who says, I can't do that, and gets kind of combative when the tutor tries to push them to move forward with the work. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, so it's a little bit frustrating, and I've tried a couple things, but sometimes it's hard to get her to.
So the student, it can be difficult to get the student involved in the writing process. So under which of those do you think, or under which of the 3 principles do you think is the primary issue? Because remember, multiple things could be going on here. Okay. Action and expression under which? Because we want to pick a primary. Just a starting point, right? You can go back and look at others, but we want to start with a primary so that we can say, okay, is this actually the thing that I need to be focusing on?
I think it would be either expression or
Executive functioning?
maybe actually the expression.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
So one thing to keep in mind with this particular one right here, if you go into expression and communication itself, there is no medium of expression that is equally suited for all learners for all kinds of communication. On the contrary, there are media which seem poorly suited for some kinds of expression and for some kinds of learning. While a learner with dyslexia may excel at storytelling and conversation, he may falter when telling the same story in writing. It is important to provide alternative modalities for expression, both to the level of the level. Okay, so this isn't me, this is them. To level the playing field among learners, to allow the learner, God, that's really convoluted, to appropriately or easily express knowledge, ideas, and concepts in the learning environment. Do you think that's the issue the student's having?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, expression and communication checkpoints. Which of these do you want to know more about to help your students?
I think the third one.
Third one? Okay. So build fluencies with graduated levels of support for practice and performance. In tutoring, we call this scaffolding, which is we work on building a base level of understanding, and then we slowly challenge them up the pyramid of the scaffold to a more narrow understanding, right? So scaffolding and tutoring, it's not usually just a straight up. A lot of times it kind of leans into a very, very pinpointed section at the top. Learners must develop a variety of fluencies, for example, visual, audio, mathematical, reading, etc. This means that they ought to need multiple scaffolds to assist them as they practice and develop independence. Curricula should offer alternatives in the degrees of freedom available, with highly scaffolded and supported opportunities provided for some and wide degrees of freedom for others who are ready for independence. Fluency is also built through many opportunities for performance, be it in the form of an essay or a dramatic production. Performance helps learners because it allows them to synthesize their learning in personally relevant ways. Overall, it is important to provide options that build learners' fluencies. Think we're on the right track? Okay. So here's some things to try. Provide differentiated models to emulate. For example, models that demonstrate the same outcomes but use different approaches, strategies, and skills. Provide differentiated mentors. For example, teachers, tutors who use different approaches to motivate, guide, provide feedback, or inform. Provide scaffolds that can be gradually released with increasing independence and skills. This is what we all hope for our students in tutoring, is that as you get further into the quarter, you need me less. Provide differentiated feedback that is accessible because it can be customized to individual learners, and provide multiple examples of novel solutions to authentic problems. What do you think?
I think the scaffolding.
The scaffolding? Okay.
Would be good for her, because I think she thinks about the paper as a whole and
Right.
really overwhelmed.
And doesn't break it into sections. So think of the paper as this huge chunk of thing that has to come out of my brain right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So she gets overwhelmed. So by like breaking it down into really small things, like she just got her what she's gonna write about. Does
Right.
that, and then breaks it down into subtopics, and then breaks those subtopics down into
Right.
smaller sections. I think by doing that, it would make it feel more manageable, and I think she would be more comfortable.
So a good example of scaffolding here would be, okay, what's your main idea for the paper? Now that we have the main idea, what's the main thing you want to express about that idea, right? And then you build. So you have your thesis, essentially. That's your main idea that you're going to express, or your argument that you're going to express. And then the next step after the thesis is, okay, let's talk about the main points of that thesis. How are you going to make that statement relevant to your readers? That's the next step, right? And then moving up and moving up and moving up. So what are some things we can do as tutors, and Jimmy, please feel free to add to this, to help scaffold paper writing for students? Have them draw their ideas out? And do outlines? Do you use the same outline every time, or do you change up the type of outline? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I find students sometimes with outlines get really confused about the line. So what I'll do is I'll do bubble outlines where they can essentially draw using colored pencils, you know, like my main idea is blue and my supporting ideas are green and my quotes are in purple, you know, whatever kinds of things you want to do. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there because we just got a little bit away, but something I was thinking of, I used to work at Indiana University in Student Academic Center there. And we had something called IPSO, IPSO, which is a very broad kind of outline scaffolding thing. Issue, position, support, outcome. And pretty much any paper you write, any chapter you read using that model, you can kind of break it down there. And we worked with struggling students. I mean, most of the students we actually dealt with were on probation. So it worked. But, you know, this kind of historical kind of evidence from that side on that one. So kind of keep that in mind. It's so very simple.
Yep. What other things? Any other things we can do to help the students scaffold their paper? Outlining is good. IPSO's good.
What does that stand for again? Issue?
Position, support, outcome. And outcome could come in conclusion or something maybe.
Sometimes I also will go through with her and like have her formulate different sentences like with me.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that can be really hard too when she's trying to like write something else.
Yeah.
Like, she just can't get it from her brain into words.
Right.
So I like try to be like, okay, what's the subject of this sentence? And then go from there and kind of add it.
Yeah, no, so when a student's having a hard time getting information out at you, right, number one, they feel put on the spot. So it's hard because you're sitting there staring at them like, yes, yes, please, give me information. And they're sitting there going, I don't know. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, tell it to me like a story, right? Just talk to me. Don't even look, shut your computer. Get a piece of paper, shut your computer, tell me about it, right? And they'll start dictating to me. And I'll listen until I hear something that sounds like that's your idea. Write that down, right? And I'll stop them. I'll say, write that down, what you just said. And they'll go, what did I just say? I go, here's what you just said. Write that down, right? You just said that. You just made that sentence. And that I find often helps with students who have a hard time kind of getting words out, is letting them speak in their own voice and hearing themselves speak in their own voice. And then the second you hear the thing that they're trying to get at, you say, boom, put it down right now. Don't lose that. Put that down. So that's another thing that I've found success with in the past. Yeah. Challenging writer, 2 big papers. I'm reiterating for the Zoomies. Yeah.
But a fantastic software.
Yeah.
We would just use the text.
Uh-huh.
We would accumulate it and then edit out
Yeah.
unnecessary and add in, and it was so.
Yeah, voice to text software. So again, you're seeing more universal design principles coming into play here. This would also be a good student to use Kurzweil with. Get them to dictate their sentences and then pull out the information that you need from that dictation.
And sometimes also the student you're describing reminds me of many I find who there's a perfectionism almost, like every word has to be great. Have them freewrite it and then go back. You know, just have them write things down. Just
Have them read Stephen King's On Writing. That's an excellent piece for people who think that the words that come out of their mouth have to be 100% perfect the first time. Stephen King, aside from being a really awesome author, is a really awesome kind of instructor when it comes to teaching people that it's okay to make mistakes in writing, and in fact, you should make those mistakes because your writing won't get better unless you do. Yeah.
What's it called?
Stephen King's On Writing. It's part of a larger work, but it's a essay that he's talking about being a 19-year-old and kind of looking back at himself as a 19-year-old and the stuff he was writing when he was 19, and he goes back and reads it now, and he's like, why did I think that was good? So, want to do one more? You guys want to do one more? We have time. Anybody got one? Zoomies, you want to add one? Does anybody want to add one from Zoom? Are you guys awake? If I turn the mutes off, are you all going to be snoring? Hello? Yeah, I called you all Zoomies. No? Nobody wants to add anything? Are you guys awake? Good Lord, you're more asleep today than normal. Okay, anybody in here got one? Go ahead, Brianna.
I feel like I have a student that's having problems with independence.
Student has a problem with independence. Okay.
Yeah, so like at the beginning of the quarter, like the student started coming to me, and I kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of like holding his hand, like, okay, like this is how you do these expectations, like this is how you're gonna want to set these papers up, like doing outlines and type.
Right.
But now, even though I feel like every time like we meet, I try to like push her to be like, okay, so why don't you try this yourself
Yeah.
and all that. But it still doesn't feel like she's being independent, or you still feel that she is expecting me to hold her hand through
Okay.
a lot of this stuff still.
So to summarize, the student's not as independent as you would like to see.
Yeah.
They're
and
relying
that-
on
and
you
the-
quite
the
heavily.
reason I think that I feel like she can be more independent is based on talking to her, I know she's doing really well in class.
Right.
And so I feel like there is that space for her to actually like start doing more stuff on her own and just have me there when she has questions or
Right.
needs help with something. But I feel like with how well she's doing and how well I know she can do on her own, that she still just doesn't want to.
So when you say doesn't want to, what might be the reasons behind that? That she doesn't want to be as independent as you know she can be.
Well, I guess I shouldn't say because she doesn't want to. I also can't tell. Well, the biggest thing is I can't really tell like what the problem is,
Uh-huh.
and so it was kind of with her situation, like she was saying some of the similar things that like that her student was happening with her student where like a lot of times like we'll be talking and I'll be saying like, okay, so like this is an example of a sentence I think would go really well here, or like
Right.
some information I should include in this paragraph. But instead of trying to say it herself, because I'll be like, okay, now try to say something like this in your own words or something
Yeah.
like that. She pretty much either reiterates straight from the article
Yeah.
that she's reading from,
Yeah.
or she reiterates exactly what I just said. And I was like, okay, well that was just an example, but could you try to just like try it on your own kind of thing? And I know that she's obviously capable of putting together like amazing paragraphs, amazing sentences, like her papers are great, but I also feel like she's still just relying on me too much to be like, okay, well what do I put exactly in that?
Okay. So there's multiple things going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is not an easy issue. This is a complex issue where you have a student who you know and can see the independence there, but for some reason they're reluctant to take the reins in their own learning. Right. So part of that is working on, again, back to the LEP 4 cornerstones, which I'm really trying to hound into you guys, because I think those are important for us to be working with our students on, and it fits so well in senior voice. I'm really proud of myself for this quarter's curriculum, by the way, because I think everything fit really nicely together. Just to pat myself on the back. But it's working on that self-actualization and self-determination is what we're looking at there. Is where are you at and where do you want to go? So I think in this case, again, we're going back to executive functioning. And with a lot of our students, it's going to go back to executive functioning. The student isn't sure about themselves. They're feeling insecure for whatever reason, and there is probably going to have to be some collaboration there to maybe determine what's happening with the student. So this is a good example of working on some of those referral skills. So facilitate managing information and resources, I think, is a good one for this student. Because I think, and it doesn't mention on here, but I fit into this one working with our executive functioning specialist, who is Christina Crow, who will be doing our presentation. I keep bringing her up because I want you guys to attend because she's only doing it one day now. So the one happening on March 11th is no longer happening. It'll be the one on March 12th is the only day she can do it, and I'll record it so everybody can go back and watch it as well. But it's getting the student in touch with Christina and maybe reaching out to Christina yourself and saying, okay, here's what's happening with the student, and I don't know what's going on, but I see that there's this level of independence that I know that they have competence in, but I feel like they're still relying on me very heavily, and I'm not sure if that's an issue that's tutoring related, so academic related, or if this is something where they should be talking with you. So managing the resources that are available to you in that instance, I think, is going to help a lot more than trying to diagnose what's going on with the student in terms of why they're feeling insecure about taking independence. Now, another one that I think I would focus on with this student is, where is it? Because they are, here it is, under engagement. Develop self-assessment and reflection, right? Because you know the student can do these things. You know that. But we have to get the student to understand that they can do that. Just because you see it as the tutor doesn't mean that they see it as the student. They could be very insecure because of any number of reasons, and any and all encouragement from you is never going to, telling them isn't enough. Showing them is even better. So develop self-assessment and reflection. In order to better develop capacity for self-regulation, learners need to monitor their emotions and reactivity carefully and accurately. Individuals differ considerably in their capability and propensity for metacognition, and some learners will need a great deal of explicit instruction and modeling in order to learn how to do this successfully. For many learners, merely recognizing that they are making progress toward greater independence is highly motivating. Not in the case of your student. Alternatively, one of the key factors in learners losing motivation is their inability to recognize their own progress. Does it sound familiar? Oh, good. It is important, moreover, that learners have multiple models and scaffolds of different self-assessment techniques so that they can identify and choose ones that are optimal. So offer devices, aids, or charts to assist individuals in learning to collect, chart, and display data from their own behavior for the purpose of monitoring changes in those behaviors. And then use activities that include means by which learners get feedback and have access to alternative scaffolds, charts, templates, feedback displays that support understanding progress in a manner that is understandable and timely. One of the things we have up here, it's relatively new, and I've talked to her about doing a presentation for us in the spring. Ellie Morris, one of our counselors, does this thing called the wellness wheel. And I think it can be adapted to tutoring, and I've been kind of playing with it with my students. I have 3 students that I use as my guinea pigs for some of this, right? And so they come in, and the wellness wheel has multiple sections on it of where they can talk about, you know, their emotional state or their physical state or their metacognitive state or their academic state or their fitness state. It has all kinds of social's one of the ones on there. They can talk about their social lives. And it's a way for students to kind of come in that day and evaluate where they are at that moment in time. Right? And it would be interesting to see what your student is selecting on that wellness wheel as kind of a way to measure where their emotional and mental state is at that moment in time. Is it an academic issue or is it something more? And if it's not an academic issue, that's a way to measure progress, right? You're feeling like this not because you can't do the academics, but because you have these other things going on. And
Kim, I like the wellness wheel.
Yeah, I know. I've got one drawn in my office right now next to a giant Pokemon image that I put on my whiteboard. So that's something that we can explore a little bit further down the road. But in terms of right now with your student, what are some things based here that you could do to maybe create data on their progress? And there's a lot of these out there, by the way.
I think the biggest, at least on my part, I feel like the biggest mistake I've been making is I'm not actually sure that I've set up with like goals for her.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like her goals coming in have always been like, oh, I want to finish this assignment during this tutoring session.
Right.
Which has always been helpful because a lot of the stuff that we've been working on have been very short. But I never really asked her in terms of like, okay, I haven't really asked her like, how would you want to be more independent or just like what are your like other goals other than just finishing your assignment? Like what do you want to see out of these? So I feel like I would probably just start there just to see if I can help facilitate like or even just figure out what exactly that other issue is behind why she doesn't feel like she can be more independent.
Yeah. A good way to ask that is, what's your confidence level with this today? Like, this is where you were at last session, I noticed, but where are you at today with it? And let's go from there. And then at the end of the session, now where's your confidence level? Right? Let them self-evaluate that. How do I feel? Because we're not necessarily talking about empirical data. We're talking about data that they can kind of use to internalize and examine their emotions and regulate themselves and kind of develop that confidence and competence that we know they have, but that they need to see for themselves, right? If at the beginning of the session they're like, I don't get it, but then by the end of the session, like, yes, I get it now, right? That's a measurable outcome for the student. We're not talking about measurable outcomes that we're going to put into an academic paper. We're talking about how are we teaching the student to measure themselves, right? How did you feel when you came in, and how do you feel when you leave? And then the next session, here's where you were when you left, where are you at today? Okay, and those are things we can definitely work on to kind of maybe find you guys some more resources for kind of self-regulation and self-evaluation. I'm looking into. There's a lot of things we're going to be discussing in today in particular, but I think there are technologies out there that we can use to maybe do a little bit more survey, a little bit more self-assessment. So if the student does well with a survey, right, here's a survey, where were you at today, where did you end? Or coming up with just our own little personal charts that we keep, like a wellness wheel, to say, okay, where are you at today? You know, how's your emotions? How's your social life going? How is, you know, and how's that relevant to where we're at today?
Is there anywhere we can find the wellness wheel? Like,
Yeah, my office. You should come see me. It's great.
I mean, there are copies.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's, if you come and ask me, if people give me names and stuff, I will send you the electronic copy of the wellness wheel for you to have. Because who was it that shared it with me? I think Ellie shared it with me. So I have it. I'll email. You want me to put it on the resource page? Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. Other than that, that's all we have time for. Any final questions, final thoughts, things you want to know? Does this make sense about how you can use this as a resource to maybe sit down and say, okay, here's the issue I'm having with the student, and I really have no idea how to go about helping them. Right?
Yeah, Kim, I'm excited about that. Hopefully it works with screen readers, but if it doesn't, then that's a UDL thing, and it's going to be very ironic and annoying. Also, if you're not getting kicked out of the room, could you stay for like 2 minutes? I have a question.
Yes, give me just a second, please. Okay, anything else? Okay, people on Zoom, please make sure you put your name into the chat. If you didn't put your name in the chat, then I can't count you as being here. It is your responsibility to tell me that you were in the training, because there's like 20 plus people in this one today, which is awesome, by the way. So if you guys have any final questions about it, let me know. I'm going to upload this to the resource page as soon as I get the subtitles and all of that put in. And follow up with me via email if you have questions. Finally, if you clocked in, make sure to clock out. If you haven't clocked in or clocked out, please make sure you fill out the Qualtrics form so that I know you attended the training. All right? Okay, thank you for coming. You guys have a good week.
Thank you. It was great.
Yeah. Chelsea, what's your question?
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me mute voiceover since everyone is leaving. Okay, so I guess I just want your advice, I suppose.
Okay.
I had a student who requested me